I sure am.
Good.
Let's do this.
All right. I would like to call the August 15th, 2022 Greenville City Council workshop to order. I'm Mayor PJ Connolly. I'll be moderating the workshop. First, I'd like to call on our city clerk for the roll call.
Mayor Connolly.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Glover.
Here.
Councilmember Daniels.
Present.
Councilmember Blackburn.
Present.
Councilmember Smiley.
Here.
Councilmember Robinson.
Here.
Councilmember Bell.
Here.
All right, Mayor Connolly, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the approval of this afternoon's agenda. Madam Manager, any recommended changes?
No changes, Mayor.
Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion's been made by Councilmember Bell, second by Councilmember Daniels. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to new business. Madam Manager, item number 1.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 1 is a presentation about Uptown commercial solid waste collection that will talk about approaches and possible alternatives. I'll turn it over to Kevin Mulligan, who will introduce the topic and then introduce the speaker. Kevin?
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. In this presentation, we'll be discussing a topic certainly that has challenged Uptown District for some time, namely disposal of commercial solid waste. The challenges seen by the business owners really are kind of threefold, right? The frequency of collection, the great variability of costs that we've seen, as well as the cleanliness, the aesthetics of the public dumpster areas. And we'll talk about that a little more. A couple of background points to really get everyone oriented. The city by ordinance, we collect residential solid waste for single family and multifamily. So refuse, recycling, yard waste, bulk, we got you covered on the residential aspect. We do not collect commercial solid waste. Also by ordinance, it is the responsibility of each business to hire their own carting service to collect their solid waste to meet their needs. So regarding the public dumpsters. The dumpsters, there are 3 main locations. There are Hodges just north of Chico's, there's Merchants right behind us, formerly Winslow's, and Rose's Lot across from Coastal Fog. In those areas, we set up public dumpster pads, and companies like GFL, companies like Republic, they have their dumpsters sitting on those dumpster pads. Now, multiple businesses use each of those dumpsters, right? So at Merchants, right, so multiple businesses throw their garbage into those dumpsters. One thing that we see, well, a couple things, right? The city does not charge a rent for that, so it's our real estate. We do not collect a fee for that. Private carting companies pay no fee, and unfortunately, the condition of the dumpster areas is often less than desirable. So one of the major key points we'll talk about. We'll show some pictures of that. This workshop will present the scope as well as several alternatives of what we've studied over the last few months regarding and come up with the best practice. Regarding that best practice, we looked at 10 benchmark cities, 10 university towns with roughly the same population, with an urban core with tight spacing. We also met with many of the business owners, as well as had conducted a public meeting with Uptown Greenville, try to get a sense and understanding of the challenges they feel they see, as well as some of their desired solutions. We will review those with you. And with me today, I don't see Donovan, he's on his way, but I want to introduce Jonathan Ingram from Terrace. He's a senior manager and solid waste expert. Council may recall we hired Terrace to walk with us through this, provide their input on this assessment of commercial solid waste in the Uptown area. So I'll turn it over to Jonathan, who will walk us through this presentation as well as some of the recommendations for council to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I did just want to let you know I didn't even have to buy this purple tie special. This was already in my closet before I got it.
Good choice. Good choice.
So as Kevin mentioned, let me just move through the PowerPoint here. So let me just give you a quick sense, and I'll try not to be redundant with some of the items that Kevin has covered with you all. But just to give you a sense of what I'd like to share with you today. So I'm going to just let you know who we are at Terrace and what some of our background is and sort of why we have developed expertise in this space. Give you some sense of the project, review the current Uptown collection approach, so we have some details that we'll share relevant to some of the points that Kevin made, some photos, just to orient you to the problem and the challenge that we were tasked with helping you all find solutions for. And then we'll spend some time talking about stakeholder themes. So as Kevin mentioned, we prioritized as part of the project, really engaging with folks, residents, business owners, stakeholder groups who have a vested interest in what happens in the Uptown Business District. Obviously, everyone in the community does. There's some special stakeholder groups that we really spent some time with. We'll go through the benchmarking findings. What do we learn from peer communities who struggle and wrestle with some of these same challenges? What have they done? What has been effective? And then, of course, what are the options? Right? What are the things that we can consider to start to address this and talk about next steps going forward? So in terms of who we are, just a little bit about Reptelis. We are one of the largest local government and utility consulting firms in the United States. We do just about everything you can think of. I often say I've studied everything from accounting to zoos. But over the course of my career, I've developed some specialization in the solid waste space. Some immediate peers of yours, the city of Wilmington, North Carolina, for example, we've helped them with a number of processes and engage with them now. Charlottesville, Virginia, that's a very comparable community to some of the challenges that you all face. Charleston, South Carolina, right? So, and I've done over 50 of these solid waste type assessments, from route studies to cost and service studies across the United States. So some very specific expertise, but just to orient you to who we are. So in terms of project overview, Kevin, really hit on some of the high points here, but we had a few key tasks. One is we wanted to make sure that we could end up with a product and with a recommendation that created consistent service level expectations for your residents, for your business owners in the area, right? So what's the level of service, what can we expect, and how do we resolve service level issues in a consistent and responsive way when they occur? The other area that we wanted to focus on is making sure that there's a transparent cost structure. Right now, different business owners are paying varying fees to different providers throughout the city. And there's really not a lot of clarity in terms of what's the basis of those cost structures and those fee structures, right? So we want to create some transparency there. And we also really want to focus on beautification in the Uptown Business District and along the Dickinson corridor, right? So you all as a community have prioritized a lot of investment in that space. You have business owners who have prioritized a lot of investment in that space. So how can we make sure that it's as attractive as possible to really reflect that investment? So as we've talked about, we've engaged in a few different key activities. I'll hit the stakeholder piece. We really focused very early on in the fact-finding part of the process to really engage with the Uptown Business Association, representatives from ECU, individual business owners. We had up to 10 individual meetings as well as meetings with business owners. We also held a public meeting to provide anyone in the area the opportunity to come out and provide their thoughts, right? So we really tried to understand how are folks experiencing this issue and what are they open to in terms of potential solutions. So that engagement piece was a heavy focus. And of course, benchmarking, I'll mention some of the best practices. Kevin gave you a decent overview there. And then of course, what are the solutions, right? So those are really the key things that we'll review with you today. So in terms of general approach, this just orients you to the map, to the general focus area of the area that we focused in on. So from 1st to 9th, the traditional Uptown Business District area, but also it's expanded into Dickinson. Obviously, with the investment that you all have made, we want to make sure that some of the challenges that we have in Uptown don't carry over into the Dickinson space, right? So we engaged with a lot of folks in that area. One of the things you'll also see on this map is a lot of different shapes and a lot of different colors, okay? And really what that reflects is that you have all kinds of container types, dumpsters, roll-off carts, shared carts, and you have all kinds of businesses who are responsible for those carts. GFL and Republic are your primary haulers, right? But there are a number of other smaller haulers. The city has some dumpsters in this space, right? So it's a very varied and complex collection environment. So the solution has to really reflect those needs. In terms of the general overview of some of the service challenges, so as Kevin mentioned, right now Uptown business owners are responsible for purchasing their own collection service, right? So through GFL, through Republic, through another provider, okay? Most businesses are using shared containers, either 95-gallon roll-off carts or dumpsters. Those are really the two primary mechanisms, okay? One of the main challenges there is the geographic layout of the community, right? So you have a number of sort of physical infrastructure limitations that mean you don't have that many places where you can have a dumpster or where you can roll out a cart. So there really needs to be, again, a relatively complicated approach to collection. Collection frequencies vary quite a bit, so some businesses, some dumpsters are collected once a week, up to 3 times a week, and there is really no weekend collection. So as you know, things get a little busy during weekend periods. There can be some accumulation of debris and waste over the weekend, which is then taken care of on Monday. Sometimes there are special collections provided, so there are occasionally Saturday collections, but not as a normal course of action. So in terms of the 3 primary issues, again, litter is the major issue, one of the major issues that we want to make sure and address. Equity, transparency of cost and service delivery, and of course that pricing is not transparent. So again, these are some of the specific challenges that we're tasked with addressing. These are just a few pictures just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, and I actually parked in Merchant's Lot today and just kind of creeped over, took a quick picture, and these issues are pretty common. So there are a number of causes to this. So illegal dumping is one of the issues. So you'll have residents, you'll have businesses who are dumping in this space who shouldn't be, right? That's a relatively common occurrence. And there's also, I think, a lack of clarity in terms of who's responsible for cleaning up that space, right? So what we want to do is create some mechanisms to really solve those issues and eliminate this kind of an eyesore issue in the Uptown area through very specific policy actions, very specific service level decisions, but also potentially some screening as well. So in terms of stakeholder themes, as I mentioned, we really focused on engaging pretty heavily, and I'll hit some of the high points. So we really talked to key folks in the community, and there's very strong interest. I would say there is enthusiasm to address some of these issues, especially around billing and equity fair share issues. So when I say there are some equity and fair share issues, is ultimately what you have some business owners who are paying GFL or Republic for collection. Okay? You have other business owners who may not be paying but are still utilizing those dumpsters. And one of the challenges is GFL and Republic and the other haulers still have to dispose of that waste, and it's still a cost, right? So their margins shrink because there's really not a mechanism for them to consistently collect the revenue that's owed. And in response, you may have a situation where rates are increased for those business owners who are paying, right? So there's a little bit of a subsidy problem going on. So we want to eliminate that issue, and there's really some pretty strong interest in correcting that. There's also a desire to have a very clear mechanism to resolve service level issues when they arise. So right now I think there's some frustration that we heard around the ability to resolve an issue. What could be cleanliness of the dumpster space, could be the way a dumpster is put back after it's collected, all sorts of things. It's sometimes difficult to address those issues in a timely way. And there's really, I'd say, a lot of openness to a number of different approaches to try to address this issue. So from our perspective, there's a lot of eagerness, there's a lot of openness. I think there's a potential for some partnerships in this space to solve some of these challenges. In terms of the benchmark findings, I'll just give you a high-level overview of some of the key things that we found. So as Kevin mentioned, we focused on really 10 communities that have similar service level requirements as the city of Greenville. So Chapel Hill was one that we looked at. There's actually some best practices that they've implemented that we think are scalable here. Fayetteville, Wilmington. Wilmington again is also an ongoing client of ours. We're working with them on a regular basis on some of their solid waste challenges. We also looked outside of North Carolina as well. So Knoxville, Tennessee, again, another university town, another example that we looked at. Conway, as well as City of Richmond, City of Virginia Beach, right? So those are the key jurisdictions that we looked at. And one of the things that we really learned is that each of those communities collects differently, right? So sometimes they have dumpsters, sometimes they're predominantly carts. It really varies, and again, it really reflects the specific geographic layout and the infrastructure limitations of their community. So what we kind of learned in that space was whatever the approach here is has to really reflect their specific needs. The other kind of key piece that we wanted to talk about was fee structure. So, we looked at what each of these jurisdictions charge, either if they provide the service themselves or if it's provided by a contractor that they contract with through a franchise agreement. And there's really varying fees, but there's some consistency. So you're seeing from a 95-gallon cart up to the dumpster size that we're really talking about, some of the main lots. You see costs ranging from about $1,000 to about $4,000 on the high end for 4 times a week pickup. Now, as we engage with stakeholders, one of the things that we learned is, and this is anecdotal, we weren't able to get the information in terms of what the pricing structure is from the providers, the haulers. because it's proprietary information, right? So, but one of the things that we heard is that some businesses are paying as much as $6,000 a year for hauling for 3 times a week, right? So there's some disparity, I think, compared to some of the benchmarks, which suggests to us that there may be some opportunity to lower costs for some business owners, but those, of course, those business owners who are not paying into the system now would experience an increase, right? So what the specific impact of that would have to be determined after some very specific rate analysis, but you know, we see some opportunities there in terms of cost structure, potentially to generate some savings. Of course, I turned it off. The other item that we wanted to point out, just looking at the fee structures, there are a couple of communities, Chapel Hill and Fayetteville, who create fee structures that are based on the type of occupancy. So really what that reflects is if you have a restaurant or if you have, you know, a business that has really high output from a waste perspective, they may be charged higher than, say, a law firm, right? That only produces a relatively limited amount of waste, right? So, so this is a really interesting concept to generate some parity based on what your individual business is disposing. And again, you can look at the cost structures here. They're still pretty low compared to some of the anecdotal information that we heard from your stakeholders and business owners. In terms of billing methods, this is really one of the most interesting opportunities as it relates to Greenville. Is one of the challenges right now is that GFL, Republic, your haulers do not really have a mechanism with the shared dumpster system, for example, to turn off service for those folks who aren't paying into the kitty. So one of the things that other communities do is they take on the responsibility of billing, right? Either through direct billing or by billing through the utility bill, so that there's a consequence if you don't pay your refuse bill, right? So that's really the primary method that's used in most of the communities that we looked at. Charlottesville requires in-person payment for a reason completely unrelated to refuse. We can talk about it later. And of course, in Charleston, South Carolina, they still provide service via general fund. We would not recommend that. Now, the other issue that we wanted to look at, or the other service area that we wanted to look at, relates to maintenance, disposal, and custodial in each of these communities. So right now, one of the challenges that we face in Greenville is the maintenance and custodial function that the group that provides service to Uptown is also responsible for providing service to the entire city, right? So there are some real challenges providing dedicated attention to that space. Those positions are also general fund positions, right? They're not enterprise fund positions, they're not solid waste fund positions. So there's some challenge in terms of balancing the focus and giving that area, which is very high use, especially during the school year, right? That's a very high use area. There's some challenge in giving that dedicated attention. But what we see in most of the peer jurisdictions is a focused effort to create dedicated crews in those areas. So the funding can vary from that. It can be general fund, it can be enterprise fund for those communities that have it. The city of Chapel Hill and Wilmington and Knoxville, they have a downtown service district, really a taxing district, that provides some extra revenue for that space. That's not necessarily, that's something that perhaps could be considered later down the road, but isn't really a focus of the analysis here. So in terms of what the balance looks like, again, some variation in terms of dedicated custodial staffing. It can range from having a contractual relationship, which is what Chapel Hill uses. City of Wilmington has 11 FTEs, but they do a lot more than just clean the dumpster areas, for example, right? They're providing collection, right? They're providing a number of additional services. The City of Athens has half an FTE dedicated, but also pulls in other support. Charleston, theirs is really high, and theirs is really high. That's a super, I don't know how many of you spent time in the peninsula of Charleston, but super high intensity tourist area, and a pretty large area just in terms of maintenance space. So they have a pretty good sized group there that also provides collection. So again, a lot of these communities are providing dedicated staff to really be able to serve these higher priority business districts. So in terms of key benchmarking, 8 of the 10 cities are managing billing, which really mitigates that free rider issue that we talked about, right? So that's a pretty common best practice. There's really wide variation in collection approach. Again, varies based on the particular dynamic of the community, and it really needs to reflect that. We also have dedicated custodial functions in each area, and there's a heavy focus on education and compliance. So one of the things that has to be addressed as part of this is we have to engage with bar owners, with staff in those bars, to make sure that disposal is happening in a way that's thoughtful and doesn't generate mess. but also that you're very intentional about educating folks to really gain compliance around illegal dumping issues. Okay. And then, of course, there are a lot of communities that have Saturday collection as well, which could be something that we want to look at in terms of a service opportunity. And then I think that occupancy type, building a fee structure that's based on occupancy type and square footage presents an opportunity to really create some parity and some fairness in what the billing structure would ultimately look like, should you all choose to take this service, take a greater role in the service. So in terms of the options, so as we kind of go through, we hear from the benchmark, we hear from your stakeholders, we engage with your benchmark communities. We really identified a few different options that we'd like to explore further. The first is really limited adjustments to the current approach. So essentially what this would mean is you would enter into some lease agreements with the current providers so that the lease agreement specifies some cleaning requirements, some custodial requirements for dumpsters that exist on public spaces, so Hodges, Merchants, and Rose's Lot specifically, right? So this, provides some benefit, but there are some challenges to it as well. You'd want to enhance custodial, and you want to enhance some of that enforcement, that education and compliance focus as well. The challenges with this is it really doesn't address the free rider issue. It addresses some of the litter challenges, but it also doesn't create a dedicated revenue source in the form of the enterprise fund that could fund those custodial positions. So there's some real challenges there. Alternative 2 is city provided service. So you all, as the entity that provides residential service, could take over this service, right? You would provide the commercial service, develop the crews, add the necessary crews and equipment to do so, and again, still take over that billing function so that you can create some parity in terms of cost recovery, and enhance that custodial, enhance that education and compliance focus. And then the third option is contractor franchise agreement with a single provider. So under this circumstance, the city would ultimately define who the individual provider, right, for the Uptown business area and Dickinson corridor would be. You would enter into an agreement and specify the service level expectations and specify what the fee structure looks like in a transparent way, right? That's essentially really the third option to consider. And again, continuing that focus on custodial, but also creating a revenue source to be able to fund that outside of the general fund. Right? So when we look at the three options, there's some advantages and disadvantages to each that we want to share with you. In terms of the option 1, which is just minor adjustments to the current approach, right? That's the quickest to implement, right? It's about 3+ months to probably enter into a lease agreement with these providers, and it has the least disruption. It solves some of the challenges or begins to address some of the challenges, but again, the issue here is many of the challenges are not addressed. So when we look at the ability to address that free rider issue, it's not really solved, right? Which is one of the main challenges that many of the businesses face. The transparency and the cost structure issue is not resolved through this option. Creating consistent service level expectations and parameters, that issue is not solved, right? So there are a number of issues here that really aren't addressed as part of this option. Taking the second option, which is city taking over the service, that one is the longest to implement. So it will take at least 2 years to implement that, largely because you have to add the crews. And there are significant challenges acquiring solid waste equipment right now. Some of the supply chain issues that all of us have experienced in one way or another, from household goods to being able to get heavy equipment that you need to deliver your services, right? There are some real challenges in terms of getting that equipment. It's also probably the most expensive, likely, from the city's cost perspective. You need to add the crews. There's a possibility you need to restructure some of the existing routes, and so there's some costs and some implementation challenges associated with that option. The third option, the contract franchise agreement, will take about 9 to 12 months to implement. There's a very specific process, and there's very specific notice requirements and bidding requirements that we would need to check off in order to move through the process. But it's a bit more efficient. You have a benefit of having a number of providers who would likely have an interest in bidding on that contract now, right? So there's some value there. This really benefits, and there's some benefits in that it really fundamentally maintains the current approach. So you still have an opportunity for a contractor or a third party to provide that service. It addresses really most of the issues that we've identified, and can be done relatively quickly, relevant to some of the other options that address those challenges. So those are really just high level, what we see as the three options, what we see as some of the advantages and disadvantages. We're not particularly recommending an approach yet, okay? We wanted to bring you up to speed on what we're seeing, what our process has been, what we've learned, and what direction we'd like to go. So in terms of next steps, ultimately what we'd like to do is look at the very specific cost and service level impact of each of these options, and ultimately come back to you with a suggested path forward. Now there would be, again, some notice requirements based on state statute in terms of notice to some of the current providers. We would want to make sure and obviously meet those before we came back to you all. But that's really what we view as our next steps, is putting some numbers, putting some very specific implementation timelines to some of these options, and coming back with you all with a recommended path forward.
Councilor Smiley.
So could you go back a couple slides to the grid? I felt like you kind of waved your hand a little bit there where, it's under alternative 3 where it says it addresses the issues the other ones don't address. Could you, that feels a little bit like a black box to me.
Sure,
right?
I'll be even more specific, I apologize. So the main challenge that the main challenge that particular option addresses that the other two do not is when it maintains the current service. It addresses each of the service level issues. So I'd say if you look at alternative 2 and alternative 3, so the city providing the service versus a franchise or contract agreement, there are two mechanisms to address the issues. And both are feasible. One is likely much more expensive than the other, right? So option 3 with the franchise agreement, the contract cost, is likely going to be a much more cost-effective approach.
But how? I mean, you say it addresses like free rider issues. How does alternative 3 address free rider issues?
Because ultimately the city would take over billing, and the sanitary bill would go on the utility bill, right? So that if that sanitation bill, the refuse and recycling bill isn't paid, there's an option to turn off that utility service.
But if and presumably the free rider issue is that they just never, they never purchase an agreement to dispose of their trash, and then they throw it into somebody else's dumpster. So
Correct.
presumably they could still do this. How would alternative 3 prevent them from doing the same thing?
So there are also some options in terms of limiting access, right? So there are key code options. There are a number of options from an access perspective that would be considered as part of that implementation. But fundamentally, if they are a business owner, right? If they have a business license in that space, they're going to be assessed the cost.
Do they have to have business licenses? I thought we got rid of those.
You are correct. Currently, we do not require a business license, but they have to have a utility.
Okay, so basically everybody who's getting water and sewer, we would know you also going to have to buy trash, and buy some trash, and we would have some sort of method of evaluating what their likely usage would be.
That's
based upon,
Based on
law
occupancy
offices. I know you guys shred all sorts of stuff, so you guys have a huge shredding bill. But that'd be very different than a
Restaurant.
or a bar
So
where
they
they
have
would.
different tiers.
occupancy type and square footage would be the two main factors you'd use to categorize based on billing type.
And we have on the residential side right now, we have a pattern of doing that because we ensure through the utility bill that every residential unit receives a bill for solid waste collection on the residential side.
So the free rider, and I'm sorry, one more question, Ms. Blackburn. So the free rider piece is resolved by sort of, we have insight into the operations of each individual location from other sources, right? Which the guy, whereas a commercial provider simply knows who picks up the phone and gives them a call.
That's correct. That's correct.
Thank you, Mary Ann, I appreciate you waiting.
Yeah, no, sure. You actually got to a lot of the same questions I had. I'm going to start with the basics. What's the difference between a rollout and a cart? A dumpster, I know what that is, but a rollout and a cart, what's a cart for business?
Cart is going to be essentially a 95-gallon container.
How big are the residential?
95.
Is that what we have?
That's right. There can be, there's a 65 as well, but 95 is
My experience is
general.
I just want to say that there are times, when we're talking about sort of prorating based on there is a sort of a one-size-fits-all that, for me, I probably have 2 small Food Lion bags, if that much, a week. if that much. And I know I pay the same thing as those folks that have it full. So there is a certain fairness issue there that I imagine would be addressed. I mean, it's fine. I don't mind paying to have all of that space. I just don't necessarily need it. So I imagine some businesses are going to maybe have the same thought, you know, why are we being assessed a fee when we don't use as much as business next door? That's just an observation. So going back just to sort of where we are with the big issue, kind of big picture, this is sort of the tragedy of the common, where you've got almost a public good, a public service, a public space, and we're trying to make it uniform, we're trying to clean it up, we're trying to have some level of accountability and fairness and transparency. Those are all really good goals. And with option 3, what we're saying is we would hire, or we would as a city contract, have this franchise. I'm sure it would be bid and everything like that. And then that whoever holds that franchise is going to figure out all the details. They're going to get into the weeds. They're going to determine how you're billed, we will collect, how you're billed, what the cubic foot of refuse is, and all those details will be on the shoulders of the franchise. Is that right?
We would, so ultimately what we would recommend is that you specify a lot of that in your bid document. So you say, all right, this is the general fee structure that we want. These are the service level expectations. You need to bid within that framework. So that we have a reasonable basis to meet our business owners' needs, to meet our residents' needs in a very specific way. So that gives you all the option to define the service parameters.
It's almost as if we took option 2 but privatized it.
Essentially.
Okay. And then my last question is, maybe you're not this far along, but this gets at larger refuse and recycling issues, but there's a lot of bottles and there are a lot of aluminum cans. So just want to make sure that recycling is a robust part of this, but I guess that would come back to us when we would set those parameters. Okay. And I think that is it. And we would determine, for instance, if there were custodial services and what they would be.
That's correct. Ultimately, you know, we would recommend what we believe is the best path forward based on the particular challenges that you all face. It's very likely we would recommend some attention to custodial, yes.
And if things look bad, we don't have to worry about, well, it was this business or that business and setting up cameras and trying to do all that. That would all be on the shoulders of the franchise.
If that's the way the agreement is structured.
Okay, got it.
Again, different alternatives could be considered, but there would be a clear mechanism to address it quickly, I'll put it that way.
Thank you.
What are some of the technical approaches to, controlling access to, I mean, I've seen the little, you go type in the code.
It can be code, it can be as simple as a key. It just gets a little bit messy. Yeah, that was not an intentional pun, but
Just go with it.
it gets a little challenging to keep track of the keys when you're talking about bars and restaurants and staff that may turn over quickly. There are a number of challenges in that space, and I think what we want to do is make sure that that there's a more robust way to address that free rider issue than strictly limiting access, which is where the utility bill really comes in.
Councilmember Daniels?
So are there a high number of free riders, and do we know who they are?
We suspect we know who they are.
Michael's been hiding behind the dumpster. He's been taking pictures.
So the difficulty is that we don't have access to the GFL data
Yeah,
or the other provider with data to
Okay.
be able to make that determination. But we have done some own research and we feel confident there are free riders out there.
And
We'll find out when
the
that
businesses
start paying, right?
downtown, the businesses downtown often will
Complain.
share who they believe is paying and not paying for that service.
So we got a list, we're gonna put you on them, all right?
I know.
We do have
I
cameras.
took that as volunteer.
Yeah,
We'll find out when they start charging them, so.
I'd be interested to get some stakeholder feedback from those businesses that are down here to see what alternatives they would prefer. I mean, my preference is alternative 3. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. I think that being able to do that and determine, have the private sector go ahead and handle that, and then maybe we just bill them from a utility perspective. I think that makes the most sense, because I think that we can determine what level of service we're going to provide. We're going to have people out there 2 times a week making sure that the dumpster pads are cleaned up. or make sure that, you know, that the dumpsters are in adequate condition, that there's no graffiti on there, there's debris that's stuck on it. That would probably make the most sense in my personal opinion. What is, as far as, will we as a city make the determination, the differences between areas for dumpsters and rollout carts, or are we gonna leave that up to the private sector company that's gonna say that this would be the most adequate place to be able to put dumpsters and put rollout carts?
You know, we'd ultimately recommend you create some conditions without being too prescriptive, right? So you want to create some opportunity for the haulers to propose an approach that is cost effective and reasonable from a service perspective. The city is going to have considerations beyond the efficiency of collection, right?
Right.
You're transforming some of your alleyways into pedestrian walkways. So, you know, very specific attention to what the impact is on the lived experience as a resident or someone using that space. So you'd be very intentional on the city side. So there's a little bit of a balance there.
Is it unrealistic to think that you could do a total conversion of just dumpsters and just have pads? The only reason I say that is look at what the post office is doing right now. All these new subdivisions, they're doing cluster boxes instead of mailboxes. You know, because everything's all in one spot as opposed to them going from here to here to here to here to pick up the trash.
That is an option. One of the challenges with that is the availability of public
Sure.
space to put them. Ultimately, you likely be in a position where the city would need to lease lot space and from private owners to be able to place those dumpsters. We are looking also at compactor options as well. There are some of these spaces where maybe compactors could be installed. It's a bit of a higher expense, but there's some benefit from a cleanliness perspective, from a smell control perspective. So those are all, those kind of options are definitely things we're considering.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have one?
Yeah. Just some other things to throw into the mix. I know in the past we've had some real, you know, just accessibility issues, you know, that just, you know, that getting, that the dumpster was, you know, behind a heavy door and was way up high, so that, you know, the prospect that you know, that a business owner who might be running, you know, a low intensity business that did not require the ability to lift, you know, 100-pound bags and put them, you know, 6 feet in the air, couldn't have any trouble getting it. Then also the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary, and I'll come back. There was another thing, but it may have already been addressed. Go ahead.
My question gets at, when the mayor was talking about pads and trying to have sort of a uniform approach, where I work downtown and where I park, there is a dumpster, and I really don't like parking beside it. But it's on a private lot. Those are gonna be immune, or are those gonna also fall under whatever we do?
Those would, you'd have one provider and they would all fall under the city's service level framework.
Even if it's a private lot?
If it's a private lot.
Hallelujah, that is fantastic.
This plan, Jonathan can speak to it, this plan would really only work if everybody collectively uses the same solution. Because what we have now is this solution where everybody has brokered their own arrangement about collection, and some don't even have it at all. So the collective group downtown would have to, we would have to, the city would have to say, you are all using that same solution.
Yeah, and you know about the MPA, the tragedy of the common. To me, this is a perfect example of that, and it needs a one solution.
I think we do need to be mindful that we want to make sure that it's reasonably priced too. Of course. You know, some people probably are used to paying a certain amount for refuge services, and I think that we want to make sure that we don't get it so elaborate that we're offering this very high level when some of these other businesses may not be used to paying that and may hurt their bottom line. So I hope hopefully we'll be able to have access to some of the contracts that they currently have. Maybe they'll be willing to provide us with the costs that they're paying for those services, so we can kind of cross-reference those as we're determining how much it's going to cost each of the commercial businesses.
Or nothing. Some of them seem to be paying.
So, and so unless there are additional questions for the council, what we will take is we will take this feedback from today. Jonathan and Kevin will probably do some additional stakeholder involvement, and then we'll bring you back a plan that would talk about these options in more detail. It's important to point out that the state statutes do provide that if we are going to ever talk about the displacement of a contractor, that there are notice requirements, and so we would have to do those notice
Right.
requirements, which means we'll notice providers, have to do some ads in the paper, and we would anticipate bringing this back to the council sometime in October or November.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Perfect.
Any other questions?
Nope.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Move on to item number 2.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm gonna stand up here, maybe y'all can you all hear me with the mask on? I'm sorry.
I think we all prefer you to keep it on.
Our next
Not me, I'm a warrior at this point.
All right, Marion says she'll stand next to you.
Right.
She'll hold your notes.
Okay, here we go. So I'm going to provide a brief introduction, then I'm going to turn it over to Byron. Our next presentation is about the American Rescue Plan and the City Council's initial funding plan. And what we want to do this afternoon is we want to provide an overview about those ARPA, we refer to those ARPA dollars. We want to provide an update on each project, and we want to talk a little bit about our revised budget estimates for those projects. It is important to note, and you're going to hear this several times through this presentation, that some of those initial estimates that we provided to council have changed fairly significantly. We have all talked about price escalations on both design as well as construction, and Byron will provide some additional information, but the costs are going up. Byron's going to provide an overview. Each department head that is responsible for a project will come up and talk about their specific project. And at the end, what we would like to do is hear from the council about your priority areas going forward with the ARPA dollars. I'm going to remind council of one other item, and that is today we're going to talk just about the $24 million that we have in ARPA money. As many of you all will recall, there is an additional $1.9 million worth of ARPA home dollars. We will bring you a presentation about that in October. There is also about $600,000 in ARPA transit funding, and we will bring that present to you all September, October, based on the integrated mobility study. So again, today, it's just about the $24 million. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to Byron.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. All right, and as City Manager Wall said, I will give a brief overview, and then I will get out the way and let the departments talk a little bit about their individual projects. So just to give you all a brief timeline, once again, in March of 21, U.S. Congress enacted the American Rescue Plan Act. January of 22, the U.S. Treasury released a final rule just detailing additional or increased flexibility for the use of these funds. In March of 2022, Council held a workshop and helped develop an initial project list based on that final rule. And here we are today in the summer of 22, where ARPA funding plan will be created based on the council feedback, and in the fall, hopefully, we will be able to provide a funding plan that will be approved by council with the intention of continuing, as we've said before, having all of our projects encumbered by the end of 2024 and all of our projects expended and all of the funding exhausted by the end of 2026. Just to remind the council again, there are two separate buckets of funding. There is a revenue replacement, which makes up approximately $10 million of the total $24.7 million. That funding can be used to provide any sort of general government services. Additionally, there's funding that is restricted for the enumerated uses. That's the other $14.7 million. That includes any public health or negative economic impacts that can be addressed, premium pay for employees, as well as water, sewer, broadband, and stormwater infrastructure. And just to remind council, there have been some pretty significant increases in design cost observed across several projects in the city within the recent months. Just a couple of examples, the 4th Street design costs have doubled since their initial estimate. And additionally, this isn't related to ARPA, but we have seen about a 70% increase in our engineering on-call contract. So costs are going up related to these design and on-call contract costs. So as a result, we do anticipate the construction costs to increase proportionately. And we do expect the potential for any of the other projects that we have proposed to see similar increases in design and construction costs increases. All right, so just a breakdown of both sections. For revenue replacement, we do have $3.6 million allocated for the build grant, 2.15 allocated right now for the East 4th Street reconstruction, and 4.25 million allocated for the Town Common Bulkhead, making up the $10 million. For the $14.7 million, we have $500,000 allocated for small business and nonprofit assistance, $1 million allocated for Greenfield Terrace improvements, 5.75 allocated for Town Common improvements, 500,000 allocated for the West End Fire Station renovation, $300,000 that's already been expended that was allocated for employee premium pay, $3.375 million allocated for the Public Works drainage pipe replacement, $2.1 million allocated for additional stormwater improvements, and a little bit over $1.1 million just allocated for any sort of contingency or administrative costs, making up the $14.7 million. And so right now I'll turn it over to our first department for the build grant update.
Maybe this is gonna be answered at this question, but for the build grant, with the $1.3 million allocation that we got in additional funding, how does that impact that project? Does that kind of, less that comes out of our general fund?
We won't know the full answer of that until we bid out the build grant. That's what Lynn's
But from
gonna
an
tell you.
anticipation standpoint,
I would tell you that the 1.3 may make it so that we don't have to go back to the general fund for more money than we anticipated.
okay.
Okay, we are very concerned about the cost escalation is significant on these projects, and we are very concerned about what those prices will come back with.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilor Blackburn?
I think you said 5.7 million for town common improvements?
Yes, that is the current allocation.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We're gonna
You're
talk
gonna
about
talk
each
about that in
project.
detail?
Yeah,
We're gonna talk about
yes.
each project, okay?
Yep.
Okay,
All right.
you got it, Lynn?
The west and west side fire
West End
station,
Fire
that's the
Station.
one was the,
American Legion, former
American
American
Legion.
Legion.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
ma'am. And we're gonna talk about each of those projects. We're gonna provide you with an update on each of those projects.
Okay, because there is a Westland fire station, old fire station, but the county owns it.
Okay, okay, we've always referred to it as West End, and so maybe we need to clear up the name for that station. But that is the building that's beside the Dream Park,
Right.
okay? Okay, you talk about the build grant, Lynn.
So,
I
I think everyone is, I think everyone's familiar with the build grant at this point. It is, it involves 4 greenway or multi-use paths and 3 streetscape projects at various locations. It's connecting the urban core, it's connecting ECU, the medical district, West Greenville, and the Uptown area. Some of our activity to date, earlier this year, we completed plan specifications, environmental documents, and cost estimates that were submitted to FHWA. We received approval of those items in July of this year. We have also worked with FHWA to complete the draft grant agreement, which will actually be considered by council later this evening. The costs at this point are similar, at least what we expect, as what was prepared in March of '22. As Madam City Manager just mentioned, we will be advertising the contracts later this fall, so if there are any construction cost increases associated with that, we should know that by the end of the year. As the mayor mentioned, we did receive an additional $1.3 million in federal build grant funds. We were advised of that earlier last week, so we were very excited to see that. And as I just mentioned, if there are any additional construction costs, we'll know that hopefully around December of this year. Our estimated timeline, again, we'll be advertising this fall, October, November timeframe, receive construction bids once those are approved by FHWA. we will begin construction in the early part of next year, March, April timeframe.
And where's
And-
FHWA? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, that's the Federal Highway Administration. They are the funding mechanism through which we're receiving the funds. And the timeline for that, construction will last about 3.5 years. East 4th Street reconstruction. This project will fund, obviously, reconstruction of East 4th Street, just east of Reed Street to Elm Street. It's obviously a very important corridor that parallels West 5th Street heading into the Uptown area. In preparation for a vote by council on the ARPA funding, staff proceeded with an RFQ process to select a design consultant so that we would be prepared should you choose to fund this project. The result of that process was selecting a team headed by Kinley Horn & Associates. Through that process, we continued to negotiate a scope and fee for their services, which we will talk about here in just a bit. As was mentioned earlier, this project was originally scoped as a reconstruction project only. There was reconstruction of the street pavement as well as drainage design. Through discussions that staff had with City Council earlier in the year regarding ARPA projects, there was some interest in considering other modes of transportation in the corridor and how we might be able to accommodate that. So after we selected Kinley Horn as the consulting firm and went into a meeting to talk about what their scope of services was going to entail, we asked them to consider that input as they developed that scope and fee. That involved looking at possibility of bicycle lanes, sidewalks, multi-use paths, possibly even shifting curb lines to accommodate some of those things. Unfortunately, as was mentioned earlier with design fees, the fee that was received from Kinley Horn for all of that scope of services was $1.1 million. That was significantly higher than what was originally budgeted in the original project. So knowing that we certainly could not expand the scope of services that significantly, we punted. We said, okay, let's see what we can cut from the scope of services to get this fee down. And the result of that reduced scope and fee, it was $688,000, which was a little over a third of reduction in the original cost that they submitted. Now, in order to get to that, what we had to cut out was consideration of bike lane alternatives. We had to go back to the curb lines are going to have to stay where they are. We're not expanding anything. We're not looking at possibility of converting on-street parking to bike lanes. We had also considered addressing the intersection of Johnson Street and 4th Street. And if you're familiar with that intersection, it's a very sharp angle. We were hoping to address that with this project, but obviously based on the fee, we're not going to be able to do that. We also, as a result of getting to this fee, we had to cut our public involvement by half. So just an idea of some of the things we had to look at to reduce the fee. So the original estimate funding was $2.15 million. And this just cut off. All right, there we go. Helps user error. So the fee that will be put before council for task order number 1 for design and bid phase services of $688,000. Our anticipated increase in the overall project cost, as you see here, is about $5.25 million total for all services, for an estimated funding gap of almost $3.1 million.
We get a little extra from the west.
How many miles is that strip? It's not even a mile.
It's not even a mile. It's about 3/4 of a mile.
It'll take 500,000.
And what's it cost us to,
Fire department.
resurface our average street or rebuild our average street per mile?
Right now, based on our last contract, we're upwards of somewhere around 2.1 million. Keeping in mind that that's not just resurfacing, we also have to go in and, when we mill it, we have to do some sub-base repair in some of the soft areas so that what we place back doesn't immediately start cracking up.
It's important to point out that this street is concrete.
Right.
So there's no subgrade, all of that has to be completely rebuilt.
Right.
Hence the astronomical cost
Yeah.
for this section.
Councilmember Bell did want to say for the record, he told you about this 4 years ago, and he said it would be cheaper 4 years ago.
I don't think,
Just kidding, Dan, just kidding. We didn't have ARPA funds 4 years ago, I'm just saying.
Everything
I
was
won't argue it would have been
Yeah.
cheaper.
Councilmember Blackburn.
Well, I was gonna ask, and maybe we've already proceeded, if you wanted us to hold all our questions for the end of the presentation, or ask questions.
Have at it.
Okay, all right. And, Councilmember Bell actually got what my concern was. That street needs to be repaved all the way down to, the cemetery, really. I really get comments about this street a lot and frustrations, and it's in terrible shape. And again, to Councilmember Bell's point, this is just to Elm is a very short stretch. Love to see it improved, love to see the deluxe treatment there. We got a lot of street that needs attention. I'm also concerned that because of the cost of the consultant, we would eliminate some essential elements such as public involvement in bike lanes and multimodal transportation. We desperately need sidewalks there. There's just a lot of needs on 4th Street, and I'm really concerned that we're looking at less than a mile getting the Ritz treatment, and the rest of it's just like, sorry.
I think it's important to point out that it is not the Ritz treatment. What this is doing is this is picking up the concrete section of the road that exists. There is no subgrade in the road. There is nothing on which to construct a road. It's not like a road that is built now where there's a lot of subgrade and work that is done. This is rebuilding this section of the road that is concrete. So I don't want anybody to leave here to anticipate that we're doing above and beyond on this section of the road. All we're trying to do is repair, rehab, repair, or replace what is there right now. And so, and the design cost, we don't have the in-house capacity at this point to do the design. And that's the reason that we would engage a firm to do that work for us.
And I know they do good work, and I appreciate that clarification that this stretch really is in need. There's a lot of need all along 4th Street, I think is really what I'm saying here, is that there's a lot of need. And also, I think public involvement, again, we can gauge that if it's enough public involvement. I'm concerned anytime we reduce public involvement, and I'm also concerned anytime we say we're gonna reduce the options for multimodal transportation.
Right. And I will say this, I hope you didn't hear that we're eliminating public involvement. When we first talked with them about considering, multiple alternatives for what we could do in this corridor, obviously go along with that, that would require a very robust public involvement process where you have multiple meetings and multiple opportunities for citizens and residents to give their input on what they would like to see. Would they like to see striped bike lanes? Would they like to see a multi-use path behind the curb? Would they like to see on-street parking in lieu of, some of those alternatives? So what we did is we actually cut it in half. So there's still going to be public involvement similar to what we would have on a standard project. It's just not to the level of what we had originally scoped.
Because many of those items that we would have added into the project, we simply cannot afford.
correct. Yeah,
Within the existing funding that we have.
Yeah, really, it's gonna be quite simple. You got $24 million. Every cost increase, if you wanna fund that, you're gonna have to take it somewhere. So, that's why you gotta get through the presentation and then say, well, this is the giving and the taking you're gonna have to make a decision.
And I guess
Reprioritize.
the final point is, this doesn't at all address repaving 4th Street all the way to the cemetery.
But when was, so the part past Elm was repaved in 13. Yeah, so it's,
Yeah, it's in good
that's
shape.
only
I
like,
drive it
that's
every
only
day.
like 8 or 9 years old.
The look of it is just from where we changed our resurfacing plan, and now we use, what's it called, the wetting, what's it called?
Crack ceiling.
Crack sealing, that's why it looks like that, but it drives fine.
Yeah, no, I know how it looks, but it is not in good shape. I hear from people who'd like to see it repaved, so that's why
I
I raised
drive
the
it
issue.
every day. And take my kids to
It's less
school.
than 10 years old, let's don't know that we're gonna, we can't.
Okay. Okay, next we'll hear from Don. Nope, okay.
Yep,
So,
just- Yep,
it
last
is
slide.
important to point out that on Thursday night, the council will consider a task order to design, to initiate the design for 4th Street. Okay? Okay, got it. Now we'll hear from Dawn.
Hi, good afternoon. All right, so this is the first of 4 projects that I'll talk about tonight. So I'm gonna talk to you a little about the Telecom Bulkhead. In January, we initiated with an engineering firm that began a condition assessment of the bulkhead. They provided a report for us on May 22, and in that report said the bulkhead is in poor condition. The bulkhead is approximately 55 years old. It was built in '67 and has reached the end of its serviceable life. This project will involve investigating alternative.
That's 55 sounds so old.
For a bulkhead.
That was pretty respectful of my age. When he said it was,
Exactly.
I was like, damn.
I'm 52, that's.
Yeah.
For the bulkhead.
2 more years, Ken.
Sorry about that, Don.
Sorry.
That's all right.
We have some,
So-
we have some older people.
The
on
bulkhead
this
is
presentation.
55 years old, so, but this project will involve investigating alternative designs and constructing a new bulkhead and esplanade at the town common. Summary of activity to date, staff Parks Planner Martin Nottingham is leading this project. We submitted an RFQ for design services in June 2022. At that point, we only had 1 statement of qualifications submitted. So we re-advertised the RFQ for design services with submittals due August 2nd, and we're currently reviewing those. We had 2 submittals for this go-around, and we're currently reviewing those and hope to start negotiations this week with the potential firm if this project moves forward. Project cost update. Original allocated funding was $4,250,000. Estimated total project cost is between $9 and $10 million based on information provided in the evaluation report. Projects being and that's the construction cost of the project. Projects being designed using a phased approach, meaning the project will be completely designed, but construction may be completed in phases based on the amount of funding available. So the estimated total funding gap based on this information is $4,750,000 for the bulkhead. Telecom project timeline. Design is anticipated to take 12 months and with a projected 12 to 15 months for construction. Again, that will be based on the level of funding. Upcoming council action will be to review and consider approval of design contract during the September 8th council meeting. Again, we're going to start those negotiations this week with the selected design firm. And next, if there's no questions, I will turn it back over to Byron.
The news gets a little bad. Okay.
Yeah.
The news gets a little bit.
over here. Lynn's by the door. He can't wait to get out of here.
News gets a little bit better. Okay.
Get me
Well,
out of here.
Yeah, the one good thing is that my one project has already been paid, so at least you don't have to worry about that. So I did want to just give you guys a brief recap of the premium pay for essential workers project that we have already funded. Just some additional requirements about how we determined who was eligible for this funding. Each individual or eligible employee had to be physically present at their jobs, which basically meant they had to come in contact with either staff or the public. They had to work within a specified date range, which was between March and April of 21. We prioritize premium pay for lower income workers, which could be defined within the guidance as anything above 150% of the county's average pay would be considered to be above or would be considered not a lower income worker. Does that make sense? So
We're with you.
okay. So this project was approved in December of 2021. The expenses were paid in January of 2022. Eligible employees received $500 and all other employees received $250. Total costs, ARPA eligible costs were $282,500, and the total cost to the general fund was just under $38,000. Any questions about that? All right, so we will move on to small business and nonprofit assistance.
All right.
Excuse me.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Okay, so staff is in the process of drafting guidelines for a grant program that would support nonprofits and small businesses in their accomplishing community enrichment activities. Okay, let's see. All right, slightly different from the last time I reviewed it. Just want to make sure that the slide is following what I'm saying. So the concept is similar to the CDBG funded subrecipient program, okay, and that it would, that's administered by the Housing Division, and that it would score applications based on anticipated outcomes, alignment with council priorities and other criteria that are determined. And the total funding pool will be $500,000. Okay, so staff intends to present the draft program specifics in an information session in the fall. And similar to the subrecipient program, an information session for interested applicants would follow, along with an open application period, and then review and scoring before the performance period, which may run 12 to 18 months and would begin likely in the spring of 2023. Okay, so staff looks forward to an in-depth presentation and feedback from council in the next couple months. Any questions?
Any questions?
I do.
Yes.
Can you go back one slide here? The information sessions, there's just, how many, one?
Well, for the subrecipient program, we have 2 sessions in one day. We usually have a afternoon during the workday session for those who want to slip away for a lunch break type of thing. And then we have one in the evening for those who may have a full-time job and then have a nonprofit that they operate. So we have 2 sessions to kind of accommodate schedules.
Is there any way we could space that out? I know last year we ended up having an additional one.
We did.
Because so many people had missed it. Is there a way that we can work that in?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I have a question too.
Yes.
How we're defining small business?
We have not defined it yet. So I will include some definitions that would be in our draft guidelines that would be presented in the next month or 2. But if there's any particular interest or concern, we can consider that as we're going through the draft.
And locally owned?
Sure, okay, we'll make note of that.
I mean, I'm just,
well,
that hadn't been established
It
yet.
has
Okay.
not-
We'll bring you back with Tiana's indicated that we'll bring back to the council what the guidelines would be in fall, and we'll have that all defined.
Okay, got it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Don? Don's back again. You could just sit right up there, Don.
I should just sit up here. All right, the next project I'll be reviewing is the Greenfield Terrace improvements, or the proposed project. The scope of the improvements will be determined with input from the community and the surrounding neighborhood. Improvements may include a fitness center, addition, parking lot improvements, walking trail improvements, which includes additional trees and lighting, playground updates, potential kitchen upgrades inside the Barnes Eden Taft community building, and also resurfacing the current basketball court. Summary of activity to date. A request for qualification for design services was advertised in June 2022. 2 statements of qualifications were received at that time. Staff are currently negotiating a scope and fee with the most qualified firm. Original allocated funding for this project was $1 million. The next council action for Greenfield Terrace improvements will be to review it and consider approval of design contract at the September 8th council meeting. Project timeline, this design is anticipated to take 9 months after a contract is executed, and construction is anticipated to take approximately 12 months. And this would, if this project moves forward, it would not impact the BT build as far as rentals for the community. Any questions?
Estimated cost now.
Once we get through the design phase, once we get the design fees cost, we'll be able to update that. Right now, that budget we feel is we can
The $1 million.
do what is expected through the.
It's not gonna be a cost overrun.
Well, that one was more or less, what can we do for $1 million? So,
Councilmember Daniels she said it's okay if we give a little away.
I really did.
Okay.
Have we met with, people in Greenfield Terrace?
No, ma'am, we had a meeting set up and,
Canceled.
she had to cancel it, so I have on my notes to do is to reach out to her for another meeting.
Okay,
Okay?
all right, thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Next project I'll discuss is the town common improvements. This project scope centers around performance venue improvements, which may include amphitheater seating improvements, fencing system with defined park entrances, concession stands, additional restroom for larger events, and a green room for performing acts. Proposed improvements will correspond to the adopted town common master plan. Summary of activity to date. Again, we advertised a request for qualification for design services, and staff have reviewed 3 qualification packages. Through that, Roadside and Harwell was selected. Roadside and Harwell has previously worked with City on the Town Common Master Plan, as well as Sycamore Hill Gateway Plaza. They were selected as the most qualified firm, and we are currently negotiating final scope and fee with them this week. Project cost update. Original allocated funding is $5,750,000. Project is being designed using a phased approach. Actual construction will be completed up to available funding similar to the Town Common Bulkhead. Once we get the design finalized, then we've been to determine which pieces and which amenities we'll be able to update for this project. As far as a timeline to design the project, the design firm will be given a 12 months timeline. Construction is also anticipated to take 12 months, but again, that will be dependent on the funding level and what amenities we're able to move forward with. Next, do you have a question?
I was gonna wait till.
Okay, well, the next council action will be September 8th, that hopefully we get to bring a design contract to council.
And just delighted that it's Roadside and Harwell, they do really good work. My question had to do with amphitheater seating. Currently, there is none, and I was wondering, do we have any idea what that would look like, or is that all just gonna be taking shape?
It's all in the design.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Because right now it looks like your chair, your blanket.
Mhm.
All right, thanks.
Yes, ma'am. And that concludes the town common improvement. Any other questions for town common? All right. Final project for Recreation Parks and Nights, the West End Fire Station renovation. This project will provide for the renovation of the building in order for it to be open for public use. Improvements we've made to make the building usable for a variety of uses, including rentals for the community. Summary of activity. So far, again, RFQ for design service has been, two qualifications have been received. Staff are currently negotiating final design scope and fee with the most qualified firm and should have that negotiation final this week or next week. Original allocated funding for this project is $500,000. An increase in funding is needed based on the current project scope and design firm cost estimates. The estimated funding gap for this particular project is $500,000. The design for this project is also will take approximately 9 months. Construction will take another 8 to 12 months, but will be further finalized once the design is complete.
And I think
Any questions?
Mayor Pro Tem Glover had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What we can do is, take, about $300,000 from, Greenfield Terrace.
She don't mean that. No, she don't.
I'll be right.
There shall be no fight.
I think for ease, we need to change the name to the Rose Glover Community Center.
That's right, that's right.
Now that I can agree, but not the money.
They call the building ready with where the fire tower is, the firefighters?
The fire tower's gonna have to come down, because it's terrible shape. Thank you. And that's another fee all by itself, right?
That was already, I think we already approved that, but.
Give it, okay.
All right, any other questions? We
Yep,
good?
Includes mine.
Okay. Okay.
All right, next I will turn it over to Public Works Director Kevin Miller.
Good afternoon again, everyone. All right, this project is the stormwater drainage pipe that bisects the public works yards, about 2,000 linear feet of 84-inch stormwater pipe, 84-inch metal pipe. As you can see in this map, so this traverses in front of street maintenance, behind our fleet maintenance, in front behind the fuel station, and out to Beatty Street underneath the railroad. So depth of the pipe is between 8 and 12 feet, and general overall condition is poor.
That's a live look.
Panic reducing sunglasses.
So, summary of activity today. We did hire Terracon to take a look at the overall condition of the pipe, as well as to collect groundwater and soil samples. You can see right here, if everyone can see this, this is the bottom of the pipe, the invert or floor of the pipe. Lots of missing sections of that, the metal, the galvanized steel has deteriorated and is missing, and there are areas where the soil is missing, so some sinkholes are created. So this is in need of some attention, immediate attention. So pipe obviously determined to be in poor condition in most areas. We have original cost estimate of about $3.5 million there. Cost of construction, obviously over the next year, will begin design, and we will get a better estimate of what this construction cost is during the design. Here is the estimated project timeline. We expect to have the RFP out in the next month, or by the end of this month. We'll be in design towards the beginning of 2023, end of 2022. We expect to come to council probably in December of 22 with this design package for award to the design consultant. We will have the design package underway in the beginning of 2023, out to bid towards the end, and then we'll be looking to be in construction beginning of 2024 with completion of 2025. So, review and consider approval of the contract. I'll change that to say December 22. We'll be looking to have that design award in front of you. Any questions on this project?
I got a question just generally about like our pipe infrastructure. There's a company based here out of Greenville. I'm sure there's companies all over the world, and I'm not saying this one would be a good fit for it, but they spray a liner inside of the pipe and kind of extend the economic life of it. Are we looking at doing that? Are we doing that anywhere currently?
We certainly have done that currently. When you get to a pipe of this size, there's concern, especially at this depth, with the structural component of this, and we've spoken to a few companies who do that type of work. Also at this diameter, 84-inch diameter, generally the cost to do that type of work is on par with replacement of the pipe.
But we have, I think it is important to point out that we have done some relining of pipes before, and we have found it to be, in the right circumstances, a cost-effective tool.
Okay, thank you.
We just relined or sprayed a pipe on New Street, just north of 3rd Street.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Last project.
All right. I'm going to join the party because if you got money to spend, we have stormwater problems to spend it on. The stormwater projects before you today, we've had it up there for $2.1 million for stormwater projects. These are projects in our secondary drainage systems, pipe systems in neighborhoods. This one being Countryside and Oak Grove. This is a neighborhood that has historic issues of flooding and drainage problems. Lots of public involvement and concerns in this area. It is our number 4 priority ranked secondary system in our watershed master plans across the city. Numbers 1 through 3 are either completed or in the process of being completed. So this is next on the list. We have already drafted an RFQ sitting on go, waiting for council to tell us to move forward and advertise that. Total of 2.1 allocated for stormwater, this project and the next one behind it. This project is estimated to cost 1.4 of that 2.1. That is escalated, as we mentioned earlier, for the 70% cost increase that we've seen over the last year. Estimated project timeline is, you know, as everything else, hoping to get the RFQ out as soon as possible and then design throughout 23, construction in 24. It's estimated we'll be bringing you a design contract in November for your consideration. The second project, a very similar project, it's a neighborhood pipe replacement project. This is off of Hall Drive near the airport. It ultimately discharges into a ditch that runs through the airport. This is our number 16 priority ranked. However, it gets elevated because this is something Public Works is already in process working with the airport in making improvements along the ditches downstream and overall in this area. So it made sense to go ahead and complete the improvements for this area. It also it fits the number that we were asking for. So we've already prepared the RFQ, and of the 2.1, this project's estimated to cost about $800,000. Again, about the same timeline, construction in 24, design in 23, and hope to bring you the RFQ in November.
For both those projects, those are both in kind of like low-lying areas that have been prone to flood, I
Yes, sir.
believe. And I believe back in 16, when we had Matthew, didn't we have to evacuate, I think it was the countryside estates or
So
something?
some of those were in the, I believe, the voluntary evacuation area.
Okay. So as far as just, you know, the piping itself, that's just gonna help out with like localized flooding, right?
Correct. It is not going to help for a hurricane type riverine
So,
flooding issue.
yeah, as the water continues to, I guess, go up, there's no way of assisting and helping with some of that extra water to be pushed back to ditches or anything like that? I don't know.
In a Hurricane Florence, Matthew, Floyd type situation, there's not really. The water's got to be somewhere, and that is the low spot where the water is. Where it will help are these lesser storms, and you know, a couple weeks ago we got 6 inches overnight. Those type storm events, it can help with those events to get that water conveyed off the street and out of their yards and away from their houses, so that it's still safe to go back and forth through their neighborhood.
Okay.
Now, will that help any with the concerns that we received from Greenfield Terrace over that way?
We have been doing some projects in Greenfield Terrace similar to this, some pipe replacements in Greenfield Terrace. That was actually one of the other secondary projects that we did first. And so it's similar to that. These pipes won't directly affect Greenfield Terrace.
The main project that has been floated at Greenfield Terrace, which is to pipe the ditch, this will not address, because piping the ditch will actually reduce the capacity of the flow and not increase the capacity. Okay, so we're gonna turn it over to Byron, and he's gonna sort of tell us where we're at, and then we're gonna pause a moment and hear from the council about some priority order, okay?
So just to recap everything, of our revenue replacement projects, the build grant is still funded at $3.6 million. East 4th Street reconstruction is now budgeted at the estimated cost is $5.2 million, about $3 million difference. And the Telecom Bulkhead is now updated to about $9 million, a $4.75 million difference. For a total of our revenue replacement of about $17.8 million to $7.8 million difference. For our eligible use categories, most of the projects are still budgeted or estimated to cost about what they were already originally planned to cost. The only difference is the Weston Fire Station, which has seen an increase of $500,000 to $1 million. bringing the total for our eligible uses to $15.1 million, $500,000 above the $14.7 million total that we have. Which brings our total, if you all can see that, to about $33 million, an $8.3 million increase in the initial project cost that we anticipated of $24.7 million.
So now, I think we have a slide or two following this that could talk about some funding, possibility of some funding changes. We can share those with you, but we would like to hear from the council if there are projects that you believe are the priority of the council.
Just for a quick refresher, the chart above, we can drop those projects down, but we can't bring any from the bottom up, right?
Well, we actually have one. We'll go ahead and show it. Do you want to show, is that what's next?
Yeah, it's actually the other way around. We can bring
It is,
any of
okay.
the projects below up to the top, but we can't drop any of the projects at the top down to the bottom unless they are eligible for an enumerated use.
Right, and we do have a suggestion that would move the bulkhead to the restricted, because it is considered a stormwater project, and move the town common up. What that will do is, it, depending on what you do with 4th Street, could increase or reduce the amount of money for those projects. So why don't we just pause here and just hear from the council regarding your priorities for these funds.
Councilor Blackburn.
I'll just jump in and say that bulkhead is extremely important because it holds up the entire town common. And 55 years old, to your point, that's a critical infrastructure project.
Yeah. And again, it's almost, you know, as much as I desperately want to see, you know, the improvements on the town common that are not the bulkhead, you know, it makes precious little sense to build, you know, a venue, you know, spend millions of dollars on a venue that's gonna be undermined by the failure of the bulkhead, right? So it seems like the bulkhead is, you know, for anything you're gonna do on the town common or anything you're gonna preserve that's already been done on the town common, it's like the bulkhead has to be the first. Unless I misunderstand what the failure of the bulkhead would mean. That we have 7, 12, 13 engineers in the room. If the bulkhead fails, we're gonna have problems up on the town common itself?
We got 23 minutes. I don't think we got enough time for 13 engineers.
Other priorities that the council wants to talk about related to the funding?
No, I agree with that. I think the bulkhead should be a priority.
So
Hopefully we can get some funding from the state.
we tried.
Don't worry, I have a conversation at
Okay.
least every 2 weeks.
So why don't we do this? Do you want to show, can we jump to the end and can you walk through that slide really quickly?
Sure. You want to actually?
Yeah, we're gonna show you,
Okay.
we did a couple of options about how you could get some additional funding. So Byron's gonna go through them really
I'm
quickly.
gonna go through it really quickly. So the first area that we looked at was eliminating the stormwater improvement projects because that was one of the last priorities and the last things that were assigned by council, as well as eliminating the additional project contingencies and administrative expenses. We tried to include as many of the projects to contain contingency where we could, so that we could reduce that. Additionally, as was mentioned before, the town common bulkhead, because it is considered a stormwater project, can be eligible for an enumerated use under the water sewer broadband and stormwater project eligibility category. And then on top of that, we could make town common a revenue replacement project, which would allow us some additional flexibility that would not be seen in the enumerated use categories. What this allows us to do at that point is it frees up the revenue replacement to be about $1.1 million under budget, or under the total cost as of right now, and the enumerated use category to be about $8.5 million under the 14.7 total. So by doing that, this would allow us to fund the town common bulkhead at $8.5 million. It's not quite the 9, but it gets us pretty close to where we need to be, and we can still take that phased approach in order to get as much of the town common bulkhead done as we possibly could. and it does allow for about 1.1 million worth of any sort of town common improvements that might be able to get. We good? Okay. All right. Additionally, if we did decide to fund any additional town common improvements and really sink some money over there, we could eliminate the 4th Street reconstruction project, as that project could be funded with PAL bill funds, the same as some of our other reconstruction. And we would be able to fund the town common at $6.4 million, while leaving all the other eligible use categories the same.
I gotta say though, from an infrastructure standpoint, I would suggest that you don't deviate from that too much. It's great to have a wonderful town common and do a bunch of improvements there, but ultimately, I mean, our goal as a local government is to take care of the core essential needs of the community, and I would say the roads are probably a lot more important than us throwing a huge concert or something down there at the town common.
Also, it's just, those things are one day gonna have to be paid for, right? That bulkhead, if, maybe Ken and the bulkhead live to both be 95.
Let's not use Ken in that example.
But, it will go, one day, it'll have to be done. And in 4th Street, one day we'll have to be, we're gonna have to pick up all the concrete and put down a real road there. And so this is, this big tranche of money really feels like, an opportunity to bite off some of those, some of those things that that we just don't, those are obligations we just don't have to pass on to, the people that come along 5, 10, 15, 45 years later, Ken. And so I just, given the fact that this is a bit of a windfall, it's like we really ought to tackle the things that are, that if we don't tackle them, we're gonna leave them somebody else.
So what I hear the council saying is, we're good with doing more with the bulkhead, doing less with the town common improvements, and leaving 4th Street in.
And the bill grant is also really exciting.
That's a
Right.
necessity.
And then-
Otherwise, we're gonna lose the money.
And then, what we would do as part of this is we would eliminate the stormwater improvements, which we have a stormwater fund for, and we would be able to allocate the project contingency. So we're good, that's how we're gonna proceed, okay?
Great job.
Great, any other
What
comments,
is
questions?
instead of thumbs up, what's the, okay.
Meh. It goes like meh.
Okay, great, now we have one more presentation, and Travis Wellborn, who's a civil engineer 3, will
Make it fast.
go
Go
quickly.
And
Can we just
the
approve
good
this?
news is, he used to be one of those guys that reads the lottery stuff on the radio.
So I know y'all are hungry. I'll make this very quick. This is item number 3, the Manual of Standard Designs and Details. 2022 revisions. I'm going to refer to it as the MSDD in future slides. Some quick background information. What is the MSDD? It's basically the standards for building infrastructure within the city limits and the ETJ. It includes details for infrastructure like plan layout, road control, streets, driveways, parking, and storm drainage. There's approximately 143 details in our current manual. Quick history of the MSDD. It was first created in 1980, revised in 1989 and 1997, revised again in 1998, and in 2011 was the last major overhaul. It was a full revision of the MSDD. Some details were deleted, some were added. It was reorganized, and everything was redrawn in AutoCAD to make it look more modern. And then 2023 is our target date for completion of this revision. Reasons for updating, number 1, to remove details that are duplicates of NCDOT and reference NCDOT standard specifications and details. We're basically trying to align everything that we have with DOT for consistency, and then remove details that are no longer applicable. We want to add a few standards and details for new materials or methods that have changed over the years. And also want to modify details to provide clarification, to remove any inconsistencies, errors, and omissions, etc. So the reason we're before you tonight, the main purpose is to discuss a stakeholders group that we're trying to put together for them to provide guidance to us on the proposed revisions. The commitment would be 1 meeting per month through the end of 2022. And the milestone dates would be to try to finalize the manual by January and implement it on July 1 of 23. The proposed makeup of the stakeholder group that we have so far is 6 engineers and consultants, 7 developers, both residential and commercial, and 7 contractors. And these are civil contractors that do street and storm drainage and utility construction. The proposed group that we've put together consists of the following firms for engineering: ARC Consulting Group, Baldwin Design Consultants, Rivers and Associates, Stroud Engineering, Malpas Engineering, and the East Group. The residential and commercial developers that we're proposing are Bill Clark Homes, Ashley Elks Construction, Rocky Russell Builders, Unshakable Builders, D.R. Horton, Taft Development Group, and Aldridge and Sutherland Builders. And then the civil contractors that we're looking at are Charles Hughes Construction, East Coast Grading and Utilities, E.R. Lewis Construction, Tripp Brothers, Garris Grading and Paving, Garner Concrete and Slip Forming, and Terracon. And so what we're looking for tonight is we're just requesting that council give us some guidance. Are there any additional firms or groups that need to be represented? And just a quick reminder, we've got local engineers, developers, and contractors represented. And also, would the city council like to appoint a liaison to represent the city council in the stakeholders group?
I'll speak, go ahead.
Well, this will surprise no one, but I don't see a place for an environmental voice. And that's a concern. I know that this really deals with, what diameter of pipe and what kind of, bolt do you want to use, and some really technical information. But it seems to me there's a place for someone, a group or a person with an environmental approach in the stakeholder group, rather than just waiting until your MSDD is completed and saying, well, couldn't we have these improvements that would be more environmentally sound?
Yes, ma'am. And Lisa and I have discussed that. And we just recently went through the stormwater ordinance revisions, and we had the stormwater committee that was put together, and those groups were included in that committee. Like you mentioned, this is a really technically detail-oriented thing. It's like what strength concrete to use, like you said, what kind of metal to use. There's the environmental regulations are in the stormwater and the erosion control ordinances. More than happy to include some environmental groups if they're interested. I'm not sure that they would have any input on the types of things covered in the manual.
So is there a place for an environmental voice, I guess, is really sort of the bottom line question.
I'm not sure that they would have any input that would be meaningful just due to the nature of the manual.
And one thing, you mentioned concrete, one thing that has been an interest of mine for a long time is porous concrete, for instance. Is that something that would be in an MSDD?
No, that's actually covered in the stormwater. It's actually in the state B&P manual, which the stormwater ordinance requires them to meet the requirements of our permits, and then there's details and stuff in the state B&P manual that tells them how to construct that to be appropriate.
Sounds good, thank you.
Councilor Smiley.
And I would like to just speak to the idea of a council liaison. I was the council liaison to the stormwater committee, and it was very difficult to add any value at all to that committee. It was a group of engineers and scientists, and the things they would talk that were being discussed were, unless one of us is an engineer of some type, it's hard to imagine actually doing anything there but listening in confusion. So I would encourage us not to
very good.
burden either the committee or one of these council members with a liaison role.
Very good input.
Unless we hear anything else then from the council, we're moving on. We'll get a pick set up and we'll bring a manual to you in January. Thank you very much. That's all we have for this evening.
Thank you.
All right.
Good job.
I got a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, motion been made by Councilmember Bell, second by Councilmember Daniels. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Motion passes 6-0.
Hey, I've had this joke this entire time.
If I wanna get some printed.
You know what the difference between